On a frozen ridge where the forest breathes like a living thing, one mistake can cost you your name, your past, and your pulse. Tonight, a single strip of meat will summon wolves from the dark, and something much worse. If you crave true survival stories that test the limits of the human will, subscribe now. These aren't campfire tales. These are the moments where nature decides who walks away, and who becomes silence. The man had no name out there, only a weight of breath and a memory of warmth that felt like a lie, and when he cut the meat he did it carefully, as if precision could keep the forest from noticing, but the forest noticed everything, especially hunger. He had come north to disappear, to let the world forget him the way snow forgets footprints by morning, carrying a pack that had once belonged to someone else and a knife that had been sharpened too many times to still tell the truth. The meat was venison, fresh and red, taken at dusk after 3 days of empty stomach and shaking hands, and the steam that rose from it was a signal flare written in scent, a confession to every nose within miles that life had ended and could be ended again. He should have cached it high, should have dragged it downwind, should have moved camp, should have remembered all the rules he once taught to other men when he still wore a uniform and believed rules were armor, but exhaustion is a liar that whispers comfort, and comfort kills quietly. He built a fire low and mean, shielded by stones, the kind of fire you tell yourself doesn't exist, and he roasted the first strip until fat popped and hissed like rain on tin, and he ate too fast, and he forgot to listen. The forest around him was a cathedral of spruce and black fir, the ground stitched with old tracks and newer scars, and somewhere beyond the ring of firelight the wolves were already moving, not as individuals but as a thought, a shared intention that slid between trunks and over drifts without sound. He didn't hear them at first because hunger has a voice louder than caution, and because the wind was wrong, carrying his smell downhill into a bowl where ravens had already lifted, black commas in a gray sentence, calling, always calling. He wrapped the remaining meat in canvas and hung it from a branch that felt high enough when he stood beneath it and too low when he stepped back, but he told himself it would do, that he would move at dawn, that the night would pass like nights always do, 1 minute at a time, until suddenly it was morning. He lay down with his back to a log, boots still on, rifle within reach but unloaded because he hated the click that gave away position, and he closed his eyes and dreamed of a kitchen light left on for him once, long ago, and in that dream he didn't smell blood. The first howl came like a question mark pulled across the sky, long and rising, answered by another, closer, and another, farther, the chorus arranging itself the way water finds a channel, and his eyes snapped open to a darkness that felt thicker than before. He counted breaths, slowed them, told himself wolves are cautious, wolves test, wolves circle, and he told himself he was still a man who could think. A shape moved at the edge of firelight, low and fluid, then another, and the howls stopped, replaced by a silence that pressed on his ears until he realized they were listening, and he was the loudest thing in the world. He stood slowly, letting the fire burn down, lifting the rifle, and when the first wolf stepped fully into the light it was smaller than fear makes them, gray and lean, eyes reflecting amber, head cocked, and behind it, just beyond, more eyes blinked awake like stars. He shouted, deep and sure, the way he'd been taught, and threw a burning brand, and the wolf flinched. Danced back, but did not run. The meat swung gently above, the canvas already torn, a slow pendulum counting down, and the man understood then that the mistake wasn't the shot he'd taken or the fire he'd built or the branch he'd chosen, but the belief that he was alone. He fired into the dirt, a warning crack that snapped the night, and the wolves flowed back like smoke, but the forest did not relax, and somewhere far off, heavy and deliberate, something else had smelled the same truth and was coming on feet that broke brush instead of slipping through it. By midnight the temperature had dropped enough that breath crystallized and shattered, and the man's hands shook not from cold but from the knowledge that the wolves had not left, they had only widened their circle, patient as accountants, and he could feel them even when he couldn't see them, a pressure like a low ceiling. He cut down the remaining meat, cursing himself for leaving it up, knowing it would only draw them closer if he tried to move with it, and he made a choice that tasted like ash, slicing off a chunk and flinging it far into the trees, listening as it landed with a wet thud, and then another piece, and another, bargaining with teeth and time. The wolves took the offerings with speed that looked like magic, shadows snapping forward and vanishing, and for a moment the night loosened its grip, enough for him to shoulder his pack and step away from the fire, angling toward the creek he'd crossed at dusk, water a ribbon of black glass that might carry his scent away if he was lucky and punish him if he was not. He moved slow, heel to toe, counting, stopping when the forest held its breath, and when a branch cracked to his left he froze so hard his joints screamed. A wolf stepped out, closer than before, head low, tail neutral, eyes fixed not on his face but on his hands, and behind it another appeared, then another, the line tightening, the lesson simple, movement invites math. He backed toward the creek without turning, using the fire's dying glow to keep the wolves honest, and when his boot hit ice and slid he felt the circle contract, felt the air change, and he remembered the bear's sign he'd dismissed earlier, the torn log, the scat full of hair and bone, old maybe, maybe not, the way we lie to ourselves to keep walking. The creak was louder than he'd thought, a rush under a skin of ice that cracked inside, and when he stepped onto it the sound traveled, a bell rung in a quiet room, and the wolves surged, not to attack but to test, snapping at air, teeth clacking inches from fabric, and he fired again, this time close, a flat crack that slapped water and bark, and the wolves veered off, not fleeing, never fleeing, just resetting the geometry. He crossed the creek with water soaking his boots, pain blooming like a bruise, and climbed the far bank, lungs burning, and he laughed once, sharp and short, at the absurdity of relief that tasted like blood. That was when the forest answered with a sound that wasn't a howl or a bark but a huff, deep and wet, followed by the pop of a jaw closing on nothing, and the ground seemed to lean toward him as something massive pushed through alder with the indifference of a truck. The bear came into view like a moving wall, dark fur rimmed with frost, shoulders rolling, head low, eyes small and bright, and the man felt the math change again, wolves flattening to the edges, predators deferring to a bigger story. He did not run because running turns men into meals, and he did not shout because the bear already knew he was there, knew his size, his smell, his fear, and he stood his ground with the rifle raised and spoke in a voice that was not a challenge but a statement of existence, steady, low, and wrong in every way that mattered. The bear swayed, testing wind, and the man remembered a different night, a different circle, a village that had trusted uniforms and promises, and how he'd learned too late that attention can be fatal. He backed away, step by step, keeping the creek at his back, and when the bear advanced he fired, not at flesh but at the ground, a thunderclap that made ravens scream and wolves scatter, and the bear halted, surprised more than afraid, considering. The meat, forgotten in all this, swung in his pack, a ticking bomb, and the bear's nose lifted and found it, and the decision was made without malice. The bear charged not at him but at the idea of him, a blur of power that closed distance with terrifying grace, and the man dropped the pack and dove sideways, feeling air move where he'd been, hearing fabric tear, and when he rolled to his feet the bear had the pack, shaking it like a toy, ripping it open, and the meat was gone, swallowed by a mouth built for endings. The wolves returned to the perimeter, respectful now, waiting for scraps, and the man ran, not in panic but in surrender to momentum, through trees that tore at him, across ice that shattered, until the forest swallowed sound and the night reclaimed its shape. Dawn did not arrive so much as the dark thinned, a bruised light leaking through cloud, and the man found himself wedged beneath a fallen spruce, breath shallow, body a map of pain, hands numb, and when he counted himself he was shocked to find he still existed. The wolves were gone, their lesson delivered, and the bear's tracks led away heavy and sure, a story continuing without him. He had lost the pack, the meat, most of his gear, and he laughed again, softer this time, because survival has a sense of humor that borders on cruel. He stood and took stock with the calm that comes after fear has spent itself, checked the rifle, checked the knife, checked his boots, and began to walk south, following the creek, because water leads somewhere even if you don't know where. The hours stitched together with pain and thought, and in the rhythm of steps he unpacked the night, turning it like a stone, seeing how the forest had given him warnings and he'd answered with arrogance dressed as competence, how the meat had been the loudest mistake but not the only one. He found old tracks of people by noon, snowmobile scars softened by new fall, and he followed them like scripture, careful now, alert to wind and sound, and when he reached a road at dusk it felt like crossing into another language. A truck passed, then another, and he raised his arm and was seen, truly seen, and when the driver stopped and rolled down the window the man tasted the strange salt of gratitude. They spoke little on the drive, because some stories are too big for cabs, and at a ranger station he took coffee with shaking hands and signed a name that felt borrowed, and when asked what had happened he said only that he'd made a mistake and been corrected. Weeks later, healed enough to sleep without listening for teeth, he returned south to a life he did not recognize and did not deserve, and he told the story once, carefully, to a room that wanted heroes and monsters, and he gave them neither, only the truth that survival is not strength alone but humility sharpened by attention. Somewhere north, wolves taught their young about circles, a bear followed a river with a full belly, and the forest kept breathing, indifferent and exacting, waiting for the next confession written in scent.